Hello, welcome back to the Curious Leader's Path. Today we've got the people that we're normally chatting with. So there's Todd Vargas and Joanne Stone and myself, Katarina. What we're talking about today is personal power. And the way that we got here is when we spoke 2 weeks ago and we were talking about self-empowerment. It started with the forest fires and the smoke that we were experiencing in Toronto, and sort of really having it strike home that we really need to start taking action. And I think the three of us, and probably many of the people who are listening to this, knew before that we needed to take action, but the urgency increased. And where we sort of concluded our session last time around in terms of self-empowerment, really sort of recognizing where can we take more responsibility. We talked about really having curiosity, which is what we always come back to for good reason. And really learning how to learn and being comfortable with experimenting and comfortable with not knowing and having a growth mindset, all these different things. And one of the things that had come up in our preamble conversation was also, and we need to understand our personal power a lot more. So the self-empowerment that we were talking about 2 weeks ago is how can we take more responsibility? And I think what we want to focus on today a little bit more is where do we actually get power from? And how do we learn to use our power effectively, whether it's formal power, from the roles that we have, the jobs that we have, or whether it's informal power, which comes from our status, our experience, our knowledge, our personal charisma, our personal skills, all those different things. But there's so often where people, and I think all three of us have had these examples, where we have power, but we may not really understand what that power is, and we don't really know how to use it effectively. Would that be fair to summarize why we think this is such an important conversation today?
Yeah, what's going through my head right now? It's Jedi power. Oh, there's another power. There's a universe power.
I just want the lightsaber that comes with that. I just want the lightsaber.
It's so important, right? No, I yes. So stepping into our own personal power. What is that?
Yeah.
Oh, This is such a yummy conversation.
It really is. So yes, I agree.
Good.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
So I'll bring my lightsaber.
Yeah. So would you guys, is there an example, sort of a generic example that you can think of where you had power and didn't use it effectively, or something along those lines? Just so we can sort of ground the conversation a little bit into our own personal experiences and maybe, make it fairly generic. The ones that I'm thinking of, I'm not going to tell you where those come from.
Well, there's so many.
That's fair. That's fair.
I'll start. You want me to start?
Sure.
Like so the very first one, we went through a couple of them, but I think from a work perspective, I stepped into position of being this most knowledgeable person to do transformations at one of the banks. So at Scotiabank, full-time job, doing transformations, and I was supposed to be the industry leader and have this whole power, of all that knowledge and experience and stuff like that. And so I stepped into this thing of holding that power, but yet I didn't feel I had it, right? So there's a whole conflict within me that was kind of like, I've got it, but I don't got it. That was part of that scenario. So
let's dig down in a few minutes. Yeah, perfect.
Is that sufficient?
And let's dig down.
Okay.
Perfect. Let's dig down on the why you felt that in a few minutes. But
Todd, okay, cool.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my example is similar. What I'll share is that early in my career when I was just starting, I was full of bravado and sort of felt like I could do anything with anybody for any reason. And I was very, very fortunate to work for some places that didn't fire me as a result. And I think, shortly after that, I got a couple smackdowns, and probably rightly so, to the point where, a little bit later on, like sort of, later in my early career, I actually became tentative. And what I realized is that there were situations where I had a lot more power and a lot more authority than I chose to use. And as a result, I would often seek approval before going for it, before making a bold move, before trusting that I actually had the power and the authority to do something, when really it was baked right into the jobs that I was doing, and I just didn't realize it. How's that? Will that work?
So both of you, I just want to actually summarize it for myself.
Yeah.
It sounds like both of you had significant formal power and just were not comfortable or knowledgeable about how to use
Mhm.
it. Is that a good summary? Just, I mean, we'll talk about details in a minute, but is that a good way
Well,
to summarize it?
It,
it
for me,
is,
that
and
feels
something,
right.
yeah, it feels right to me too, and something popped into my head as you were saying it, because I think, especially as I grew further on in my career, um, I had it attached in my head that power and knowledge were inseparable. So the further I went, the
Huh.
more I believed that subject matter expertise was essential in order to wield the power, and the
Huh.
less confident I felt within the context of that subject matter expertise.
Hmm.
That's
So,
interesting.
later in my career, it was project management. But it was it was often other things too. Sometimes it was software development. It was
Yeah.
social media. I've worked in a bunch of different places.
Yeah. So in my situation, I have almost always worked in environments where I didn't have formal power or very little formal power. And I had to make a lot of things, pretty significant things happen without any formal power. So my whole life has always been leveraging informal power. But there were times where I actually had power and I had responsibility. And it's not actually power, but I had responsibility. And it was sort of like a personal responsibility to do things. And I either didn't do them or didn't do them very well or did the opposite. Like I just made wrong choices in terms
Mm,
of what my responsibilities were. And to me, it's a power issue because I didn't understand. Number one, I actually didn't understand what my responsibilities were that came with the work that I was doing. And I also didn't understand that I did have power in those situations and therefore had responsibility. And
mhm,
therefore, I kind of neglected to do what I should have done. And I've got like 3 or 4 examples right now that I'm actually quite ashamed of. Um, it's not like huge things. It's, nobody was damaged or nobody was injured in the process, but I certainly didn't build the relationships or build the power for all of us that I could have. So,
mhm,
yeah. Does that make sense?
mhm. And you're right, it is quite different. I'm struck at how it's sort of like the opposite side of the same coin.
Yeah.
That what you're describing versus what Joanne and I described.
Yeah.
What do you think, Joanne?
I know. So what was coming up for me was this whole power. There's something about being right that gives power.
Ah,
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Well, you're when you're talking, you're talking about I didn't have it right.
Uh,
And
mhm,
so, and I was going like, I'm wondering if the whole thing around power is based on like when we make our definition of power, right? Power is money, power is status, power is this, power. But I think everyone will have their own kind of definition of what power
mhm,
is. And so, and what powers you up and what makes you feel powerful. I have knowledge, it's powerful. If I'm right, it's powerful. If I'm righteous,
yes.
there's this aspect of it being intertwined with something about our
Mhm,
definition of what power is. So it's just so when I heard Kat when you're talking, I just my little brain how it goes. It goes, well, there sounds like there's right in there. So I was just picking that up. But that's
yeah.
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
How does that
Interesting.
land? I wasn't
Kat's like,
expecting that. But you're right. There's like even sort of the knowledge piece and the subject matter expertise, right? And being, like you said, being a transformation expert in the field that you were hired into, and feeling, you didn't say this, but I'm gonna say imposter syndrome, because that's what came up
I
for
didn't
me,
even,
right? And
yeah,
that whole fake it till you make it thing, because it's like
yeah.
there wasn't permission to get it wrong.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. I don't know. It was a permission for me. I think it was just that it was all that was a lot of it was internal, right?
Well,
Um,
you didn't give
You
yourself
want to
permission, perhaps.
yeah, true, true, true.
talk
That was
talk
it. Yeah.
talk more about this idea of permission. Like why did you not embrace your power? What was the permission element of that? I think
Uh,
it's a really important one. Like I think this idea of
yeah.
permission is really, and all three of us have experience with coaching and
Yeah.
coaching training, and we all know this permission. We've talked about permission a lot in those contexts, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's been so many times, sorry, Joanne, while you're thinking, I'm speaking
Yeah.
out loud. Sorry about that.
It's
Like, I'm
okay.
just thinking how many times in my life where all of a sudden I felt like somebody gave me permission to do something. And I'm like, oh, all right. And then I just stepped right into what I was supposed to do.
Hmm.
Oh,
Hmm.
that's a theme with me, right? Where people think Joanne has it, she can do it. And then it's this constant, oh, look at that.
You brought
I
you
love it.
on.
I
Yeah, yeah,
bestow the permission on everybody.
yes, I want that.
That's excellent.
But there's the aspect of there's been so many other people that believe in me, but yet I don't believe in myself.
Yeah.
And
Right. So
why not? If you dig down on that, why not?
I just feel it's this pattern that has been within me where I've been given something and it's just failed. Right. So it's like
What's failed?
it's a self-sabotaging kind of
Ah,
thing where it's uh it's uh uh it's I am going into kind of a coachy kind of thing. Um I think it has to do with, and Emily's here. Hey Emily.
Yeah. Hey,
Um
Emily.
so for me, I think some of it has to do with I keep going back to this safety thing, right? Like it just feels safe that someone else has it,
Hmm.
and that if it's given to me, then if I fail, then it's seen, right? And then I'm seen as a failure, and then I'm not part of this particular group, right?
Mm.
Um,
do you think you were
so
failing? Not, I'm not saying you were failing. Did you
yeah,
feel like you might fail because you didn't have the skills of power? Because nobody had ever taught you how to use power? Do you think you were lacking technical skills? Like what skills were
oh yeah.
missing?
Yeah, so I'll tell you that we talked a little about this, that I have this challenge with authority, right? So, my father was a very, very, very strict man, right? You do what you're told, otherwise, you would get penalized in a certain different way. Like if it was a strap, or if it was whatever, you just did not. So I really believe that I grew up without that sort of understanding of how it's okay to challenge power. It's okay to, be powerful, right? It's like there's this aspect of I was never given that kind of like permission with my own stuff to have that power to
Hmm.
own who I am, right? And
Hmm.
that it was basically always someone else's to take care of it. And I don't know if this is a female kind of thing too, right? Your job is here, we're here to do this for you. So but I there's to me, I think there's a probably a few mixture of things which I myself is I'm still unfolding the
Hmm.
onion a little bit, but I feel so much more my power now than
Hmm.
I ever have in the past. So much more, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I would concur with that. And it's interesting because when we think about the topic of permission and self permission, and if it's okay, I want to call up the comment that Emily left and just bring it up on the screen here. So Emily says, my coach would often ask me, "Do you need to create a permission slip in this space?" And I love that. I love that so much. And because when I think of the times that I could have just created permission for myself
I
rather
think I've
than
got to go to
waiting for someone,
Staples and get myself a little
like,
notepad now.
I know, isn't that a great idea? I think I might just do the same thing. And exactly. And so, yeah, Emily, I think that you've given something to everyone on this call, including us. So thank you very much for that, because perhaps that's really, one of the keys here. is just, well, what was, I guess now that I was not expecting this, but I mean, I guess now what I'm thinking is like, well, what the heck was I waiting for? And
So we're okay. So we need the wand and we need the
exactly,
notepad
and the
and
permission slips.
yeah.
And it's truly it's truly profound when I think of that, because like so many other things in our lives, we hold ourselves back, right? And within the coaching context, we talk about saboteurs and what they're there for, and that they're always with us, and what is it that they're trying to tell us, and what's the gift that they give us, and ultimately they're all trying to keep us safe, because they like inertia, and keep doing what you always been doing. I just oh I'm sorry. And yeah, it's this is really 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 interesting to me, and Emily says she has them for sale in her imaginary Etsy shop. I love it.
just drop us the link. Go ahead, the whole
Exactly,
board.
right, you'll sell thousands of them.
Probably. When
Yep.
I think about the times that I didn't use my power very effectively, there was a lot of that permission bit is, and that can be unpacked in lots of different ways. It could be the cultures I worked in and sort of the power structures and knowing very well that I didn't have the formal power. So I
Mhm.
think that I just sort of learned I was focused on achieving stuff for other people. And I didn't
Mm,
really understand what my personal power and my personal responsibilities were with the power that
mhm,
I had. So there is a lot of that permissioning and different aspects of permissioning in my situation where I didn't use my power. There were also a lot of this cultural permissioning, this cultural expectation.
mhm,
Um, the family that I come from, what the expectations were in that family, there's gender elements, but there's other elements as well that are connected to that. And when I see a lot of my students at the college who are newcomers to Canada, I think a lot of them don't feel like they have the permission to use the power that they do.
mhm,
So I mean, we all experience it in different ways and at different times for different reasons. That's a culturally imposed restriction. And I think the more aware we can become of that, the more we can decide how true all those things are. But
mhm,
then there's also a lot of skills. So there's personal management skills that I don't think I developed until much later in life. And I
mhm,
think, Joanne, this kind of dovetails with what you're talking about. Um,
Mhm.
and there also were technical skills of management and communication. Um, and I've got an executive MBA from one of the top schools. We never talked about this, right? It was always sort of intrinsically done. And when I look at the people who are very skillful in their use of power, and I'm saying skillful because it's not just do they get power and use it and enrich themselves with it, but the people who actually create better outcomes for everybody, like the true inspiring leaders, often, not always, they come from families where they learned intuitively through the family dinners, watching their parents, watching their social circles, right? They learned how to use their power. They felt like they deserved to have power. It wasn't even a matter of deserve, it's just they just had it
mhm,
and they were expected to use it. But there's a whole skill set that comes with that, and it's everything from social skills to power skills to negotiation skills. So I think there's a whole range of skills that I never learned, and I didn't even know that I needed to learn. And the ones that I knew I didn't have, I had no idea where to learn them.
mm,
Yeah.
You know what's interesting for me is and we talked about this, Cat, before, and this is so. I feel sometimes like I know there's all these tools that you're talking about, and so I want to kind of, from my perspective, I find you a very powerful person, like super powerful, super strong, and I make up that, and just like me, also very powerful, like when I was younger, right? And um, but only in certain situations. It didn't shine until a later point in time in my life, right?
mm,
Yeah.
I didn't know I had it. Others could see it, but it was certainly there. And I would make up that there's a switch or there's something that all of a sudden you kind of like grabbed it. You just went, this is who I am. And it's sort of like, it's like this stake that goes in the ground that says,
Yeah.
I believe in myself. I know who I am. It's okay to friggin' fail. I'm not knowing everything, right? And you know what? I don't, or maybe I don't know who I am, but I'm willing and I'm curious enough to figure it out, right? Because, and that's what I continue to keep doing, right? And this is where the act of forgiveness happens, right? The act of,
Yes.
of sometimes like repatterning our mind because it's so used to not believing in ourselves that we have to kind of I've called it I heard this in a term when I was in Amsterdam, micro nudges, right? This whole thing aspect of what little things can I do to repattern our brain, or my brain, so I can get it onto this pathway of making the impact that I want to make in the world, right? So but I have to believe I'm curious enough to figure it out. Yeah.
I'm going to put that on the screen too.
Yes.
Absolutely, Emily.
And that's what we get. It's okay. Let's not get scared of it. But that's a really interesting thing. Like, I do recall trying to figure out this I'm not enough kind of thing, this not really believing in myself, right? And then going into that space because it's scary, right? When you open up some of those doors, bring my lightsaber and it can be scary, but having that courage and curiosity, I think, yeah. Anyways, I'll stop there. But I like, for me, Kat, when I think of you, and I know Todd, you've always, in my mind, have always seemed like you've held this power, like both you guys. And to me, it feels like there's probably a point where it shifted in you when you believed in yourself, right? And then once you do that, then this communications and everything else starts to make it. It's so easy. It's so easy, right?
I wonder. Let me take that question that you just, or the statement that you just made, and let's shift. What allowed us to take that power, or what can we do to really recognize, build, and act on our power? What can we do? So, Todd, if you want to respond to what Joanne said, and sort of thinking we've got 6 or 7 minutes left,
for sure.
Just sort of, what are the things that we can, that in our own experience really worked for us, and what else can we do?
I wish I could say it was intentional. I honestly wish I could say it was intentional. I wish I could say that it was something that I recognized and I just saw and I knew, oh, I need to make this change and I'm going to be methodical about it and whatever. But I needed a complete full on breakdown. And like, I needed to break apart and not know what else to do. And here's the thing. I wish that I didn't have to do that. And I don't think that that's the only way to do it. I mean, I do think it's a very effective way to do it, but I certainly don't think it's the gentlest or the most effective way to do it. And I'm also very lucky that I had a very soft landing because I have a fantastic family who was extremely supportive through the entire process. But as you know, I mean, that was fairly recent for me, and stepping into my own curiosity and my own power is a fairly recent thing. Certainly, well after you met me, Joanne, and were describing me as a powerful individual in that situation. So
powerful before. You were powerful before.
and it's really, and the theme there is like, you saw something that I didn't see in myself because I was faking it at that time. And that's, I mean, that's cool. It's really interesting. And like, what's coming up for me as you say this, and maybe it's because we were talking about lightsabers and stuff, but that scene in Return of the Jedi when Luke has to go into the scary cave and he says, "What's in the cave?" And Yoda says, "That's fear." But he goes in anyway because that's what he has to do. That's what it is. Like, I think that's that moment, knowing that my curiosity and my personal power is bigger than my fear. And once I can kind of figure that one out, well, then that means that, because because the thing is there's not just one cave. There's a sequence of caves, and there's always going to be a next one. So we're always going to have to go into it, and once you go into the first one, it makes the second one easier.
Mm-hmm.
That was maybe a bit of a metaphor, but there you go.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. And I love this idea of courage and curiosity as being sort of really the cornerstones of
Mhm.
learning to figure out how to build our power. And I want to go back to something that you guys had talked about a little bit earlier on as well, is defining what does power mean, right? Like there's a Viktor Frankl YouTube video somewhere of him,
Oh,
up on stage at university writing on a blackboard, literally a blackboard. And he basically says how many, and I'm obviously completely bastardizing what he said, but not Viktor Frankl, sorry. Yeah, that's right, the
Yeah.
psychiatrist.
Yep.
It is Viktor Frankl. And he basically says, the question is sort of how many people believe that money is the root of all evil? And how many believe that you can either be wealthy or a good person, which basically means you're putting it on one axis. And then he says, actually, it's two axes. If we think, and how do I get my hands on the screen? We have one axis of how wealthy are you, and another axis, which is how good are you. And I think we can do the same thing with power. We have to really define what does power mean? Because I actually think a lot of us are uncomfortable with power because we assume power equals evil, or some variation of that. It's probably more subtle
yeah.
than that, right? Or we think, if we're going to take control of a situation or be the leader in the situation, whether it's a collaborative leader or not, if we step forward, we maybe feel like we're challenging our own identity or we're challenging what people think we should be. And so that's sort of the cultural expectations, but it's also our embodied sense of what does it mean to be powerful. So I would say we need courage and curiosity, and some of that curiosity needs to be on how do we build the skills that we need? How do we make sure that we feel like we're worthy? And how do we even make peace with power to recognize that power is essential if we want to have a positive impact on the world? And it doesn't necessarily have to be correlated with bad
Yeah.
things.
There's this aspect of trust that's here too,
Yeah.
right? And there's aspect of trusting that you are going to be in any situation that you're in, you can be with that situation.
Mhm.
Like that's super, like for me when you started to talk about that, like for me when I've stepped into this to where I am right now, I have to trust in my capability that I'm able to be in with that situation and the choice of that
Yeah.
situation, right?
Mhm.
Which is really important because before it was like if I could make that decision, if it doesn't work, then I'm ousted from the tribe, right? So like
Yeah.
I'm put into the
Yeah.
planet somewhere else in the space and left there to kind of whittle away, right? So it's so, but then shifting it to trusting in one's and believing in oneself and cleaning up my mess if I do create a mess, and I've done that
Yeah.
before for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But trusting in me was a big thing too.
Yeah. Trusting self and trusting that we can work with others and that others are willing to work with
Yes.
us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the only thing I would add to that is because you did mention curiosity, and I think not just curiosity about what power is, but curiosity about what's important to me. Because I think that a lot of us, I mean, certainly I did. You know what, I'm going to say a lot of us. I'm going to say I did. I grew up with a bunch of assumptions about what power was,
Mm.
and it had to do mostly with authority, whether it was my parents or whether it was the priests at school or whether it was the professors at university or whatever it was. Right? There were always authority figures, and I never questioned
Yeah.
what power was. I just knew it was something that I wanted to be able to grow into, and I never questioned why or why it was important or what I would do with it once I had it. And I think that if I start there, then I have an opportunity to really think about, okay, well, so what's the big deal and what does power mean? Because power can mean many, many different things in many different situations. And if I know what's important to me, then I can probably know what kind of power I'm seeking. And maybe it is money, and maybe it is knowledge, and maybe it is something else, right? But what's important is gonna sort of, what's the word that I want to steer that? That's what
I,
I think.
It's interesting. There's two words. There's something about power and agency, right?
Yeah.
Power, and I think you're talking about Katrina. Katerina, is this as power over, or like it's either your power over or power under, right? Like there's
Yeah.
this aspect,
Yeah.
and that.
And let's
that
reframe it
difference-
and say power with.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Ooh.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so where I look, I think of it as agency, right?
Mhm.
Versus a power thing, right?
Yeah.
And that
But I think
is,
so. What we talked about 2 weeks ago is self-empowerment, and I would equate that with agency.
Mhm.
And power is
Authority.
what other people give to us. It's more than
Ah.
authority. There was another word that you used earlier before we got on live.
Influence.
Yeah, it's power to me is how much can we influence things and how much control do we have, which is the former. Yeah.
Fair.
So just because unfortunately we're out of time.
We are.
Always
Just
happens.
blew
Isn't it?
past.
I'll put my saber back.
Yeah,
We can play.
bring it out another day.
Oh
So
my.
just to wrap up, what a great conversation. And it's
You have permission.
Yes.
brilliant. So courage, curiosity, trust, and really
Mm.
thinking about definitions and what does it mean to us. So
Indeed.
yeah, let's give permission to all of us to really harness our power much more effectively. Recognize it, build it, use it, all for the good of the,
That's
the
so
good of
sweet.
whatever we want to impact.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Right.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Jedi.
Love your comments, Emily. Thanks so much.
Indeed. Thanks, everyone who joined us.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
Yeah. Good night.
Bye-bye.